Most people waste their lives trying to compete with others, trying to look better, trying to prove something. However, the harsh truth is that comparison kills focus. And if you don't learn how to master yourself, you'll never build anything worth remembering. Today, I want to share with you the darkest power lessons I learned about why you must focus on yourself, not others. When I look back at my journey, I realized something that most people never understand until it's too late. The moment you start comparing yourself to others, you stop creating. You stop thinking differently. You stop being original. You see, comparison is subtle. It disguises itself as motivation. You look at someone's success, you know what they've built, and you tell yourself, if they can do it, so can I. And at first, that sounds inspiring. But very quickly, you cross an invisible line. You start imitating instead of innovating. You begin chasing instead of building. And the most dangerous part is, you don't even realize it until your originality is gone. I've seen brilliant people destroy their potential because they couldn't get out of the trap of comparison. They were obsessed with being better than someone else instead of being obsessed with building something that had never existed before. They thought the world rewarded those who worked harder than their competition. But the truth is, the world rewards those who think differently. And you can't think differently if all your thoughts are trapped in comparison. When I started Apple in that little garage, I wasn't thinking about IBM. I wasn't thinking about Microsoft. I wasn't even thinking about the giants who already owned the industry. I was thinking about one thing: how to build something insanely great, something that would change the way people lived. If I had spent my energy comparing Apple's tiny team to the massive resources of those companies, I would have quit before I started. Because by comparison, we were nothing. We had no money. We had no experience. We had no power. But we had imagination. And imagination doesn't survive in comparison. It survives in obsession. Comparison makes you blind. It distracts you from your inner vision and makes you chase shadows. You look at someone else's success, and suddenly, you forget why you even started your journey. You begin to measure yourself by standards you didn't even create. Think about that for a second. You are living your life, your only life, based on rules written by someone else. That's what comparison does. It steals your freedom before you even realize it. And here's the darkest truth: the more you compare, the weaker you get. Because comparison is addictive. It's never ending. There will always be someone richer, smarter, faster, more successful. You can spend your whole life running in that race, but you'll never win. Because it's not your race. You're running in someone else's lane. And when you do that, you lose the only advantage you ever had: being yourself. You know, people often ask me, Steve, weren't you afraid of failing against these big companies? My answer is simple: I didn't even think about them. They weren't in my mind. My competition wasn't IBM. My competition wasn't Microsoft. My competition was my imagination. My competition was yesterday's version of Apple. Every day, I ask myself one question: how do we make something better than what we made yesterday? That's it. That was the only comparison I allowed, because that's the only comparison that matters. The problem with focusing on others is that it makes you reactive, not creative. If IBM had released something and all I did was try to make a cheaper version, Apple would have never existed. If Microsoft did something and my only response was to do it faster, Apple would have been forgotten. But I didn't want to play their game. I wanted to create my own game. That's why comparison had no place in my mind. I've seen too many people waste their lives building things they don't even care about just because they want to beat someone else. That's not creation, that's competition. And competition without vision is meaningless. It doesn't matter if you win the race, if the race itself is meaningless. The world doesn't remember those who imitate. The world remembers those who created. The world remembers those who dared to think differently, even if they looked crazy doing it. And here's the paradox. The moment you stop comparing yourself to others, that's when you start becoming someone others will compare themselves to. Because the energy that was once wasted on jealousy, on fear, on insecurity, is now invested in building something authentic, something so original that it forces the world to pay attention. So, I want you to ask yourself right now, how much of your energy is being wasted on comparison? How many of your decisions are driven not by your vision, but by your insecurity about being behind someone else? How many times have you ignored your ideas because you thought someone else was already ahead? Every time you do that, you kill a piece of your originality. You kill the very thing that makes you valuable. The reason most people never create anything timeless isn't because they lack talent, but because they never stop comparing long enough to hear their voice. They drown in the noise of others. They let envy dictate their decisions. They let fear disguise itself as strategy. And in the end, they become shadows of people who weren't even paying attention to them in the first place. If you want to build something meaningful, if you want to live a life that matters, you have to let go of comparison. You have to realize that it doesn't matter what they're doing. It doesn't matter how far ahead they look. It doesn't matter if the whole world doubts you. The only thing that matters is what you are building, what you are obsessed with, what you are willing to bleed for. That's where your originality is. That's where your genius lies. That's where your power begins. There's one thing people don't understand about success. It's not just about talent. It's not just about ideas. It's not even about timing. Success comes down to energy. Your energy is the real currency of life. And the truth is, most people are bankrupt before they even start. They spend their energy on things that don't matter. They waste it on gossip, on envy, on distractions, on chasing approval. And then, when it's time to build something meaningful, when it's time to create, they have nothing left. I learned this the hard way. In the early days of Apple, we didn't have money. We didn't have influence. But we had something worth more than both. We had focus. We had energy that was laser sharp, directed only at one thing. Every ounce of it went into creating products that were not just good, but insanely great. That's what made the difference. Not resources, not connections, energy. Pure, obsessive energy. Think about how you spend your day. Every thought, every worry, every distraction costs you energy. When you compare yourself to others, that costs energy. When you argue over things that don't matter, that costs energy. When you scroll endlessly, looking at lives that aren't yours, that costs energy. And what do you get in return? Nothing. You are throwing away the only currency you can't get back. When I came back to Apple in 1997, the company was dying. It was bloated, distracted, spread too thin. Too many projects, too many ideas, too many directions. Apple had energy, but it was scattered everywhere. So the first thing I did was cut. I killed dozens of projects. I told teams, stop, focus, because energy is not infinite. If you spread it too thin, it becomes worthless. But if you concentrate it, if you pour all of it into one thing, it becomes unstoppable. That's what most people don't realize. They think the secret to power is doing more. But the secret to power is doing less with more energy. It's focusing so intensely on one thing that the world has no choice but to notice. It's not about outworking everyone else. It's about outlasting them because you refuse to waste yourself on distractions. Your energy is stolen in ways you don't even see. Every time you react to someone's opinion, you pay in energy. Every time you let jealousy take root, you pay in energy. Every time you argue to prove yourself right, you pay in energy, and the debt piles up until you're exhausted, bitter, and empty. That's why so many people quit. It's not because they weren't capable. It's because they spent their energy in the wrong places, and by the time it mattered, they had nothing left to give. When I was building Apple, I didn't care about being liked. I didn't care about being understood. I didn't care if people called me arrogant, demanding, or crazy. Why? Because defending myself against criticism would have cost me energy, and I needed every ounce of it for Apple. That's the trade you have to make. You either spend your energy protecting your ego, or you spend it building your vision. You can't do both. Energy is not just what drives your work. It's what shapes your life. Look around. People who are drained, distracted, tired, they can't create. They can't imagine. They can't push. They've already given their energy away to things that don't matter. And then they wonder why their dreams never take off. It's because dreams require fuel, and the only fuel you have is your energy. I always believed that if you want to do something truly great, you have to be ruthless with where your energy goes. You have to say no, 1,000 times no. Not because the opportunities are bad, but because they take away energy from the one thing that matters. That's why I always told my teams, focus is not about saying yes. Focus is about saying no. Protect your energy like treasure, because that's exactly what it is. Think of your energy like an investment. You only get so much of it each day. Where are you putting it? Are you investing it in building something that will last? Or are you spending it like loose change, tossed away in meaningless comparisons, endless distractions, empty pursuits? The people who win are not the ones with the most energy, but the ones who spend it the wisest. And here's the darkest truth about energy. The world is designed to steal it from you. Every advertisement, every opinion, every distraction, it's all pulling at you, trying to drain you dry. If you don't learn how to protect your energy, you will lose it before you even realize it's gone. That's why discipline matters. Discipline is simply the act of guarding your energy, of saying no when the world demands yes, of shutting out the noise so you can pour everything into your vision. The greatest power you will ever hold is not control over others. It's control over your energy. Because when you master that, when you stop wasting it, when you stop bleeding it into things that don't matter, you suddenly become unstoppable. You become someone who can work through exhaustion, through doubt, through failure, because your energy is not scattered. It's directed, it's concentrated, it's dangerous. So if you want to know why you're not where you want to be, don't look at your talent. Don't look at your resources. Don't look at your circumstances. Look at your energy. Ask yourself, where is it going? Because that's the only question that matters. The truth is, the world doesn't care about the second best. The world doesn't reward imitators. You can copy someone's moves. You can mimic their strategy. You can even try to dress like them, sound like them, and act like them. But when the dust settles, nobody remembers the copy. The world remembers the original. And this is where so many people waste their lives. They think success is about chasing what's already been done. They see someone rise, and they think, if I just follow their steps, I'll rise too. But it doesn't work like that. Because the moment you copy, you step into their shadow, and shadows never shine. When I was building Apple, there were plenty of people trying to imitate us. They thought that if they just made something that looked like a Mac, they would succeed. They copied the design, they copied the interface, and they even copied the commercials. But you know what happens to copies? They fade. Because they lack the soul of the original. You can imitate the surface, but you can never imitate the vision that created it. That's why I never cared about competition. Because I knew if Apple was focused on its own path, if we stayed true to our vision, the imitators would always be behind us. They'd always be chasing what we had already done, never what we were about to do. And that's the key. Innovation isn't about following. Innovation is about leading, even if nobody understands where you're going. The darkest reality of life is that most people don't even try to be original. They're too scared. Being original means being misunderstood. It means being doubted, criticized, and laughed at. And most people can't take that. So they settle for imitation, because imitation feels safer. But the price of that safety is invisibility. The world never remembers the ones who played it safe by copying. The world remembers the ones who were bold enough to be themselves, even when it made no sense to anyone else. When I introduced the first iPhone, people thought it was crazy. A phone with no buttons. A phone that was a screen. They laughed at it. Critics said it wouldn't work. But we weren't trying to copy anyone. We were trying to create something the world had never seen. And because we dared to create, not imitate, we didn't just make a product. We changed an industry forever. Imitators don't change the world. Originals do. That's the difference. You need to understand something. The world is full of noise, full of people shouting for attention. And if you want to rise above that noise, you can't just repeat what's already out there. You can't be another echo. You have to be a voice so distinct, so unique that it cuts through the noise. That's what originality gives you. It gives you power. It gives you leverage. It gives you immortality. Think about the people you admire, the ones whose names are written in history. They weren't imitators. They were originals. They didn't follow paths. They created them. They didn't chase trends. They built them. They didn't look over their shoulders to see who was ahead because they were too busy carving out a future that didn't exist yet. And here's the cruel truth. The world is ruthless with imitators because the world doesn't need another version of someone else. It needs the real version of you. If you try to be the next Steve Jobs or the next Elon Musk or the next whoever, you'll always fail because that spot is already taken. The only spot left is the one where you are unapologetically yourself. That's where your power lies. But most people never find that spot. They spend their entire lives chasing shadows. They imitate because it's easier, because it looks like a shortcut. But the shortcut is a dead end. No matter how fast you run in someone else's lane, you'll never win the race, because it's not your race. It's theirs. And the only way to win is to run your own. When I think back, the moments that defined Apple weren't when we were competing with someone else. They were the moments when we ignored the competition completely and focused only on our vision. That's when the magic happened. That's when we created things people didn't even know they needed until they saw them. That's when we changed culture, not just technology. The danger of imitation is that it kills your imagination. When you're busy copying, you're not creating. When you're busy chasing, you're not building. When you're busy measuring yourself against someone else, you're blind to what only you can see. That's why so many people live lives of quiet frustration. They know deep down they could have been more. They know they had ideas, dreams, visions. But they buried them under imitation because they didn't dare to be different. And let me tell you, being different is the hardest choice you'll ever make. Because the world will resist it. People will doubt you, laugh at you, criticize you. But that's the price of originality. And if you can't pay that price, you'll never earn the reward of being remembered, the reward of creating something timeless, the reward of leaving a mark that no imitator can erase. So ask yourself, are you living as an imitator, or are you daring to be original? Are you chasing shadows, or are you willing to walk into the light of your vision? Because at the end of the day, the world doesn't reward those who copy. The world only rewards those who create. The greatest illusion in life is the belief that power comes from controlling others. People think if they can manipulate, dominate, or outsmart everyone around them, they will win. But the truth is darker and far more difficult to accept. Real power doesn't come from controlling the outside world. Real power comes from controlling yourself. Self-mastery is the only power that matters. I learned this lesson through pain. In the early years of Apple, I was relentless, obsessive, sometimes even brutal with my team. I thought if I pushed hard enough, if I demanded enough, I could bend everyone to my will. And sometimes it worked. Sometimes it produced results. But here's what I realized. I could control a project. I could control deadlines. And I could control the people around me for a short time. But I couldn't control myself. I couldn't control my impatience. I couldn't control my perfectionism. I couldn't control the chaos in my mind. And because of that, I lost. I lost the company I built. It was only after that downfall that I began to understand the real game. The battle was never out there. It was always in here. The enemy wasn't the competition. It wasn't the critics. It wasn't the doubters. The enemy was my lack of self-mastery, my inability to regulate my emotions, my inability to focus, my inability to discipline my energy. That's what nearly destroyed me. And that's what nearly destroyed Apple. You see, the world will test you in ways you can't even imagine. It will throw distractions, temptations, failures, and criticism at you every single day. If you don't have control over yourself, you will break, because life doesn't reward those who are talented but undisciplined. It doesn't reward those who are intelligent but impulsive. Life rewards those who can master themselves, who can stand still in the storm, who can stay focused when the noise gets loud, who can push forward even when their mind screams at them to quit. Self-mastery is the darkest lesson because it forces you to confront yourself, and most people run from that. It's easy to point fingers at others, easy to blame the competition, and easy to say the world is unfair. But it's hard to look in the mirror and admit the truth. The reason you're not where you want to be isn't because of them. It's because of you. It's because you haven't mastered your habits, your discipline, your mind. When I came back to Apple after being fired, I was a different person. I still demanded excellence. I still had the same vision. But now I had learned something deeper. I learned how to control my focus. I learned how to say no to everything that didn't matter. I learned how to let go of my ego and pour all my energy into building, not proving. That was self-mastery. And that's what saved Apple from collapse. Most people think discipline is about restriction. They think it's about cutting off joy, about living a smaller life. But discipline is freedom. Because when you master yourself, you are no longer a slave to your moods, your impulses, your distractions. You are free to choose where your energy goes. You are free to stay locked into your vision while everyone else gets pulled away by noise. That's why self-mastery is power. It's the one thing nobody can take from you. Ask yourself this: how many times have you started something and quit, not because you lack the ability, but because you lack the discipline to follow through? How many times have you been distracted by envy, by criticism, by fear, and let it derail you from your vision? How many times have you let your emotions control you, instead of you controlling them? Every time that happens, you lose power, not to the world, not to others, but to yourself. The people who build legacies, the ones who change industries, they're not just the smartest or the most creative. They are the ones who have mastered themselves. They've mastered their focus. They've mastered their discipline. They've mastered their ability to stay calm when everything around them is falling apart. That's why they rise above, not because they controlled others, but because they controlled themselves. Self-mastery is the difference between reacting and responding. Most people react to life. Something happens and they let it dictate their mood, their focus, their decisions. But those who master themselves, they don't react, they respond. They don't let the outside world dictate their inner world. They choose, they decide. They act on vision, not impulse. And that's why they create results others can't even imagine. The hardest battles I ever fought weren't against IBM, weren't against Microsoft, weren't against any competitor. The hardest battles I ever fought were against myself, against my impatience, against my ego, against my own need for control. And it wasn't until I learned how to win those battles that I could finally lead Apple to its greatest victories. So many people spend their lives chasing power, chasing recognition, chasing control. But they miss the truth. The only control that matters is self-control. The only power that lasts is self-mastery. Because when you master yourself, the world can't shake you. The critics can't break you. The failures can't stop you. You become untouchable, not because the world gets easier, but because you become stronger. When I look back at everything I've built, everything I've lost, everything I've learned, I realize the real power was never about the technology. It was never about the money. It was never about the recognition. The real power was about mastering myself. Because without that, none of it would have lasted. You see, comparison kills creation. If you waste your life measuring yourself against others, you will never hear your voice. And energy is your currency. If you spend it on distractions, envy, and noise, you will go bankrupt long before you ever build something meaningful. The world doesn't reward imitators because copies fade. It rewards originals, the ones bold enough to create when everyone else is busy chasing. And the darkest truth of all is that the only power you can ever truly hold is the mastery of yourself, your discipline, your focus, your ability to stay locked on your vision when the whole world tries to pull you away. Most people never learn these lessons. They live their lives trapped in comparison, drained of energy, chasing shadows, and losing battles against themselves. But the few who do, the few who protect their energy, who create instead of imitate, who master themselves instead of trying to control others, they are the ones who change everything. Because in the end, greatness doesn't come from competing with others. It comes from competing with yourself every single day until you become the kind of person who cannot be ignored.